A word welcome from myself on behalf of the whole organizing committee. As Arthur mentioned already, this conference is organized by 6 Wageningen chair groups. Wageningen is not a normal university organized in disciplines or faculties, basically organized in thematic chair groups. 6 of them came together for this conference. The Sociology of Development and Change group, environmental policy, forestry and nature conservation policy, cultural geography, knowledge technology and innovation, and water resources management, together with SOAS at the University of London. So on behalf of the organizing committee, of course, also a very warm welcome. If you want to tweet about the conference, I've been told this is something important. My colleagues at the environmental policy group are a little bit further ahead than some of the more archaic development scholars like myself, right? Hashtag POLLEN16. That's where we hope that the online discussion will take place or revolve around. So please, if you want to, then more than welcome to do so. This is the first official Pollen conference. Now you may wonder, what is Pollen? What's Pollen all about? Pollen is basically an initiative with several colleagues from around Europe first, but quickly many other parts of the world. It stands for Political Ecology Network, and it aims to be an umbrella organization of political ecology researchers, groups, projects, networks, and what we call nodes. Nodes are sort of the central thing. Pretty much any group, even individual, who designates themselves as political ecologists and interested in exchanging information, sharing political ecology ideas, discussions, supporting each other, or be supported by others. Much more I can say about this, but the network is still developing, and so all of you have a fantastic opportunity to come and help us to further develop this. Think about the governance structure. How can we further set up this network as an efficient supporting network for the kind of research that we're all involved in, without it becoming overly bureaucratic. And so tomorrow morning, right here in this group from 9:30 to 11, we will have a session, a roundtable on pollen. So you're very welcome to attend that if you want to. All right, so why are we here? Why did we feel that we needed to organize this conference? Last year, when we started brainstorming about this with all the different chair groups involved and different people, and with Rosalie Duffy from SOAS in London, we were triggered by sort of very worrying tendencies that we saw pretty much all around the world in terms of intensifying conflicts, new forms of violence around the environment, within particular sort of political, economic context and frameworks. And I think many of us are involved in these topics. This is, of course, an old topic in the field of political ecology, but we felt there's something new going on, and it's also somewhat worrying, and we wanted to put it out there and create a space to discuss this. So that's basically where we come from. Obviously, political ecology would go beyond sort of dichotomies like the chessboard here, right? Humans versus nature. This is very often sort of the more general picture, exactly what political ecology tries to move beyond. But I did think that the idea of the chessboard was interesting, because oftentimes with big environmental problems these days, I hear a lot of people say we need to, we need to act on this. We need to come up with solutions, and of course that's true. But sometimes in the rush to come up with solutions, there seems to be a little time for actually thinking things through and having spaces to sort of reflect and sit back and discuss these things properly. This is the kind of space that we hope to provide, and in doing so, also, get an understanding or develop a joint understanding, an idea of the meaning and nature of contested 21st century political ecologies. Where does political ecology stand today? That is more or less where we come from. And to just to give you a bit of a taste of the conference. We had an overwhelming response to our call, so thank you all for that. Absolutely amazing. We have over 370 people registered, probably more coming over the next 3 days, over 40 from 40 plus different countries, over, what is it, 47 panels, 63 sessions. So it means you'll have to choose. Can't go to anything you would like, perhaps. So apologies for that, but the rich choice also, I think, shows how vibrant this field and this discussion is. We also, and he's not here yet, but we also have what we call a conference mole, and he will come at about 10 o'clock, so just in time to introduce him without him knowing this. A good friend of many of us. So he is here, Dan Brockington, straight from the airport. Actually, Dan, I was hoping that people would recognize you based on that picture, which is actually on his bed. So the idea is that he would sort of sniff around the conference, get a good feeling for what's going on, the discussions, and then help sort of distill some of all of this. And in the final plenary in 3 days from now, give his idea of these various questions that I laid out before. So thank you, Dan, for doing that. And so if he stands around you listening, be careful, because it could be noted and reported. All right, a couple of practicalities. There are 3 conference venues. This one, the mountain. We're very proud of this. The Wageningen bed is the main venue. You have several halls in this hotel. I think all right next to each other, if I'm correct. But there are 2 other ones. Schip van Blauw and the Koetshuis. If you want to start practicing your Dutch, these would be good words to start. Schip van Blauw. And they are indicated, so there are routes. Our colleagues planned for good weather. So you can walk through the lovely National Botanical Gardens. If you follow the blue route, you will get to Schip van Blauw, and the red route will lead you to the Koetshuis. Lunch will be provided in these various venues, so if you have a session before or after in one of these places, please do stick around. Lunch will be there as well, just to avoid that we all go either there or here, and we spread out a little bit. Something we had to do given the fact that the hotel didn't have enough capacity for all the participants. All right, a couple of thanks for now. I will come back to that a little bit later, but this conference wouldn't be possible without obviously the participation and financial support of the different chair groups involved, and of SOAS, the University of London, many people in the advisory committee of the conference. Our National Research Foundation, NWO, the Netherlands Foundation for Scientific Research, was very generous in funding this meeting. We have about 20 volunteers or so who are going to be around helping you get from one place to the other. If there are issues, you can ask them. I think you will recognize them because they have a special badge, if I'm correct. So they'll be here. Many thanks to them, particularly many thanks to probably the household name now that you've all been corresponding with, Stasja Koot, Sven da Silva, and Marielle Takes, who've really been instrumental in putting this all together. So a round of applause for them. So with that, welcome again. I wish you fantastic deliberations, and I look forward to talking to all of you in the coming days ahead. So have a fantastic conference. From there we'll move right into the first keynote. I think we have a couple of very interesting keynote sessions. Tomorrow we will have Kui Naidu speaking, and on Friday we'll have Professor LeBillon speaking. But today we have Professor Philippe LeBillon, and as discussant, Professor Rosalie Duffy. Very welcome. I think Philippe needs a little introduction, but there are a couple of things still I think I wanted to note. Philippe has an MBA from Paris and a PhD from Oxford, and is currently a professor at the University of British Columbia with the Department of Geography and the Liu Institute for Global Issues. Philippe has done fieldwork in many different places. I guess for many normal people, if you look at the list of countries, these are probably the countries that most of us sort of do not want to go to. And in the Netherlands, our national government has sort of a red list of countries. Well, this reads like the red list of countries of the government not to go to. So Philippe has done research in Angola, Cambodia, Iraq, Sierra Leone, South Sudan, the former Yugoslavia. And actually I come from a group where we have a big tradition of disaster studies. And in fact, exactly when the government changes the designation of a country from yellow or orange to red, half of my group immediately buys tickets and wants to go there, right? So, same here with Philippe, it seems. Philippe is a proud political ecologist and geographer with interest in environment, development, security, and interest in empirical focus on primary commodities. He's done a lot of work on the political economy of war and reconstruction, and published widely on this. Some of his recent books are Wars of Plunder, Conflicts, Profits, and the Politics of Resources, 2014 from the Oxford University Press, and together with Gavin Bridge, a book called Oil with Polity Press. You all probably also know Philippe from two of his most famous papers, one in the Annals and one in the journal Political Geography. If you go to these websites, you have these sidebars where it says most read, most cited, right? That's Philippe, right? So with the Annals, his article Diamond Wars, Political Geography, his article The Political Ecology of War are some of the most widely read and cited articles in this field, in political ecology and geography generally. And so we could think of no better person to open this conference, because he's been truly foundational to the kind of topics that we're discussing and keeps pushing the envelope. So I'm very honored and proud that he's willing to give a keynote. Philippe, may I ask you to come on stage?
Thank you. I think this is too much in a way, and I think it tells more about the logic of snowballing and how some selective narrative can sometimes take precedence. Okay. Okay. So. All right. So I would like to make some very brief thanks to the people I've been in touch. So Brian, Stasha, Marielle, and Sven. They've all been great in making this possible. It's really an exciting conference, and I'm really glad and honored to be here today. It's really very good, and I look forward to the rest of the conference. So I'm going to basically start with something that you highlighted in one of your newsletters, and that we've got to think about when we're working is we're in this very comfortable hotel, and our lives are being very secure generally, even when we go to so-called red zones. But some people are there, 24/7, and they are the one for which the changes that we're striving for will make the most sense, but they're also the persons who will bear the consequences of those struggles. And of course, you all know, because there's been wide international coverage about the death of Berta Cáceres. So Berta was more or less our age, in her early 40s, and yeah, she was, a feminist, political ecologist in the field, we can say, and she was murdered like so many other people in Honduras in particular. And so, what I want to say is not to instrumentalize the death and saying, well, this is so important, but at the same time, what I very much hope is that what we're doing is also, in support of those people in the field. And it's not always easy with the academic life that we have, but I just wanted to stress that. So, in March this year, thousands of people took the streets, and hundreds of thousands sent messages to protest the killing of Berta Cáceres. The Honduran feminist, indigenous, and environmental scholar movement leader had long opposed a major hydroelectric dam project in a Lenca indigenous community. Within 2 weeks of Berta's murder, Nelson Garcia, a colleague of her and another member of the Civics Council of Popular and Indigenous Organization of Honduras, COPIN, was also killed by gunmen, like if the death and killing of Berta was not enough to make a point. although the government initially claimed Goethe's death was the result of a burglary, international outcry really pushed the government to actually try to arrest and identify and arrest at least the triggerman. And 4 men were subsequently arrested, including the former military, who was also the former security head of DESA, the hydroelectric consortium that was behind the project. So despite the brutal death, I think this activist, Bertrand Nelson, once again put those struggles to the forefront of the international agenda, and you've seen the UN reacting to it. And hopefully they will continue to inspire community and land defenders in contesting what is often benignly described as resource development. In fact, DESA was actually called about development of energy, desarrollo de energía. So it is important to recognize its increasingly dangerous struggle. And I have to say that as it peaked in 2012, and I looked at the first stats coming out in 2013, I thought, wow, the resource boom is over, the killing is going to stop, but it did not, and it's still going up. So we've all been, engaging in this field for some reasons. And for me, essentially, it came a little bit for concern for both the environment and for people. I was sitting in between 2 chairs, I felt, and I thought that political ecology was a great way to do that. I first entered the field unknowingly in the early 1990s, out of a little bit of a romanticized view of forest conservation in Cambodia, which in itself was also quite fascinating, as a place where a genocide had been recently committed, but also where the state of nature, in my view, was also very pristine. And so I really decided to basically stop there and work for 3 years and try to make a difference. I was very lucky to meet great people there, great Cambodian who helped me understand what was going on, as well as 2 organizations, and often that's what it takes to get things implemented. And I worked with IDRC and Global Witness. They provided a larger framework for action. So focusing on rebel groups financing and political corruption around logging, I was initially enticed to push for the hard measures, the protected areas. So actually I was in a small team and we pushed for 19% of the country going into protected area. And I felt very proud but very ambivalent having visited some of the communities and already knowing that this would impact them. I also pushed for logging embargoes and log export embargoes in particular. But I was also very conscious that it was part of the livelihoods of many people. What to do about this? In the end, we pushed for the embargo and we got it after documented extensive timber trade. And this was the very first report, black and white, no internet. So I've been continuing to work and collaborate with NGOs like Global Witness that has since tenaciously reported on resources, conflicts and corruption, broadening its investigation to a dozen other countries and seeking also lasting structural changes through innovative institutional reforms like the Kimberley process, the extractive industries transparency. But all these things are still working within the kind of confines of neoliberalism in many ways. So there's a bit of a debate there. So while I followed and participated in some of those campaigns, I also realized that it was not always easy to draw a line between the good guys and the bad guys, given the realities of local war economies and coping livelihoods of rural communities. At times, it puts me at odds with the organization I collaborated with, as reductive and seductive narratives were often a key part of the success of the campaigns. I have to say, a key part of the success of some of my papers too, because they were resonating with these things, even if I tried to be critical. So the blood diamonds and conflict mineral campaigns, for example, were partly tainted by this, resonated with racist cliché, dangerously oversimplifying the conflicts, and being often instrumentalized by part of the industry to regain legitimacy and reassure consumers. It was very distraughting, for example, for me to hear that the beer's rep at a very small meeting with high-level officials from the UK telling me, "Thank you, Philippe, this is the best insurance we can have for our industry." And he was talking of the Kimberley process, which was a certification of conflict diamond. So I had created the insurance policy for the industry. This presentation gives me a chance to briefly reflect on environment and conflicts, as well as political ecology and engagement with the politics of contestation. So what I will be trying to do is So first, talk a little bit about the rise in environmental and resource-related conflicts. Probably your journal has maybe covered that, or seeing some of the statistics coming out. I will then mention a little bit why conflict is at the core of political ecology study. I will move to the distinctive contributions made from political ecology, and I'll engage a little bit with environmental justice and the importance as political ecologists of engaging with environmental justice. So the rise in conflict doesn't touch only environmental topics. I think it's been a broad phenomenon over the past decade. Since 2006, roughly, in many categories of types of conflicts, we've seen a doubling, if not tripling, in the number of public protests. And essentially, we're kind of reliving a May 1968 cultural revolution, but of a different nature also. It's not the age of plenty that is drawing people to kind of react to it, but a number of anxieties, and I'll go through this, and frustrations that are bringing people out in the streets. In conflicts in mining, it's been particularly prominent, and here is statistics from the industry itself. So it's only the most egregious types of conflicts that they consider, and again, we've seen a very high rise in those numbers. And those conflicts have taken place pretty much everywhere. Great work done by Ejolt at the Autonomous University of Barcelona, the EG Atlas. Probably all of you have heard about it, maybe some of you have contributed to it. They've documented about 1,800 conflicts now in the world, so I am invite you to consult that and feed the database, etc. It's quite amazing to see the diversity, also the relative locations where they are, and the type of conflicts being involved. So most of them are related to agro-industrial projects, so the famous land grab that has been covered so much, mining, water, and fossil fuel projects, but they extend into other categories, as you can see on the bottom right. So looking back at 30 years, which is more or less my adult life, thinking, okay, why do we have this? I don't want to provide a broad explanation too much, but generally, there are three major processes that come to mind to explain what appears as a rising socio-environmental conflicts. The first includes major democratization processes that have reshaped international relations and transformed domestic forms of contentious politics. As a colleague of mine working for the UN Human Rights Commission at the time in Cambodia told me, yeah, it's different now, they don't kill them, they jail them. Yeah. So essentially people have the hope of not being immediately killed, so they go out in the street and protest, to make it very, very, very crudely. So while the fall of many repressive authoritarian regimes opened up political space for more civil forms of contestation, ineffective or delegitimated democratic institutions, like the ones in Cambodia, where the Prime Minister has been in power for more than 30 years. There's a good report by Ecology that just came out. You can see how its relatives control most of the economy. Study and conduct of conflicts. In the realm of war, narratives are replete with references to the influence of terrain, and to read Derek Gregory's The Natures of War, for example, in Ecology, the wartime logics of resource supply, and more generally the geopolitics of strategic resources. Concerns for the links between conflicts and the environment flourished in the context of growing environmentalism and the reframing of security from the mid-1980s onward, with the concept of environmental security emerging as a major theme in the post-Cold War reframing of international security. Failing states, growing population, fast-spreading disease, and climate change were combined to paint a grim picture of a coming anarchy threatening the West, to use the expression of Robert Clapton's famous 1994 article. Following notably on the works of Betsy Arkman, her colleague Simon Dalby, on the deconstruction of environmental security narratives, or Benedict Korf and Chris Kramer on critics of the resource-first paradigm, four main theoretical perspectives on resources and violent conflicts can be identified. The first one is obesing, which essentially conceptualizes resource conflicts as rational individualism in the context of a breakdown of authority and privatization of violence. The second is neo-Malthusian, which combines the anxieties of demographic growth, resource depletion, and environmental change to result in scarcity-induced resource conflicts. The third, and the one in which I have some complicity, is the utilitarian one, which derives in part from rational choice perspective and suggests that resource opportunities affect conflict feasibility, as well as greedy and ruthless behavior on the part of some belligerents. And finally, is the Schmittian perspective, which is probably the closest in an irony twist to the one of political ecologists, for which historically complex identity narratives, group loyalties, and enmity are refined in part through resource conflicts. Both neo-Malthusian and utilitarian perspectives have come to predominate the mainstream debates and policy agenda over the past 2 decades, with green wars at times competing and blending into greed wars narratives. So following the impending water war scenarios and environmental security discourse of the late 1980s and early 1990s, blood diamonds and other conflict minerals came to take prominent place in narratives of African conflicts, while more recently the Arab Spring and its aftermath, including the rise of IS, have been frequently interpreted as a dangerous new era of failed democratization and rising terrorism in the face of food scarcities and climate change. So of course this exonerates who you can imagine. Okay. I see another link between ISIS and the US, for example, at this time. Although the US could be brought into the climate picture also very easily, of course. So much research has since been conducted on these different paradigms, including from political science, development economics, etc., with very sophisticated statistical analysis. And many of the empirical findings have largely debunked many of the simplistic initial assumptions linking either resource scarcity or abundance, even dependence, to more likely violent conflicts. So overall, as Larry Duck mentioned in a very critical article, accounts of resource wars tend to oversimplify the causes of war. They tend to pathologize conflict areas. They often dismiss political motivations. They criminalize economic coping livelihoods, and they tend to prioritize corporate-led economic reconstructions associated mostly with large-scale capitalist modes of production and wealth distribution, rather than local livelihoods, environmental practices, and moral economies. So in contrast to a perspective naturalizing conflicts through their focus on the relative scarcity or abundance of resources, political ecology approaches are thought to provide nuanced and historically grounded analysis of uneven power relations, conflicts, and violence around natural resources. In this respect, the definition of Nancy Lozo and Michael Watts is for me a reference point when they say that violence should be approached as a site-specific phenomenon rooted in local histories and social relations, yet connected to larger processes of material transformation and power relations. Violence and conflict, Nancy Peluso wrote in 2002 during a panel on violence and political ecology. She said, violence and conflict lie at the heart of most studies in political ecology. Indeed, I wanted to check the data later, and I found that if you use a basic Google search, about 2/3 of articles from political ecology use the concept of conflict. The second one being power. Very common. The idea that conflict is also at the core of the discipline is also reinforced, for example, by Juan Martin Desalier, who works in a narrow definition, says that political ecology is simply the study of ecological distribution conflicts. Thematically, Paul Robbins has identified environmental conflicts as one of the 5 major areas of political ecology. And to these he adds degradation and marginalization, conservation and control, environmental identity, and social movements. All 4 often include also conflictual dimensions. More broadly, political ecology is about recognizing the political dimensions of environmental and resource issues, and thereby engage with many of the conflicts that come to constitute some of the collective decision-making processes contesting pre-existing status quo or consensus. So, recognition of the political character of environmental issues, as Paul Robbins points out, not only includes the politicization of environmental problems, especially when local groups, and I quote, secure control of collective resources at the expense of others by leveraging management interventions by development authorities, state agents, and private firms, but also the ecologization of pre-existing conflicts. So seeing conflicts through the lens and the narratives, and essentially having a performative aspect that includes ecological needs, and especially as a result of changes in conservation and resource development policy. So, conflicts notably result from the effects of labor and power divisions, distributing unevenly the access and responsibility for natural goods, who should be in charge, who should be able to access it. Also the property system and connections with commodification processes, as Scott Prudhomme wrote recently in the Routledge Handbook of Political Ecology, which probably is becoming the backlog. And so, party systems that are politically partial and historically contingent, and also from development activities that are rooted in specific assumptions about the class, race, and gender of participants in the development process, often resulting in poorly formed policies and uneven and frequently unjust results. In this respect, many political ecologists take as given a stratified notion of society structured by uneven power relations. And from the starting point, as Raymond Bryan and Philippe Bailey suggested already some time ago, many political ecologists consider that changes, in their quote, will not occur without considerable struggle, since they necessitate the transformation of a series of highly unequal power relations on which the present system is based. That's written on this also. So many political ecologists are thus not only interested in the causes and various forms of conflicts, the causes being generally what attracts most of the other disciplines, but also in their emancipatory potential, a point I come back to later in this talk. So by understanding conflicts and contestations in a broad term, in a broad sense, and not waiting also to see more visible, direct manifestations of physical violence, political ecologists express a sensitivity that better captures the unfair or tense and just character of socio-environmental relations, and as well as the various forms of violence and modes of resistance that can be involved. And here we can think of James Scott. In this regard, critical engagement with capitalist process and the role of the state is pretty much hardwired into the field of political ecology. 2 decades ago, to cite again Raymond Bryan and James Bailey, political ecology, third world, observes that the work of political ecologists has been largely an attempt to describe the spatial and temporal impact of capitalism on third-world people and environments, and especially the adverse social and environmental consequences of capitalistic nature resource extraction, logging, mining, fishing, and cash crops, but also conservation, conservation, water management, as well as industrial and urban pollution. New directions for political ecology research on environment and conflict-related conflicts and contestation remain largely open, but some topics and approaches are demonstrating growing prominence, greater urgency, or promises of new theoretical insights. Within the confines of traditional topics, conflicts associated with the global land grab, so-called global land grab, and more generally with the green grab, have received much attention, notably with respect to the more nuanced understandings of dispossession processes of small holders by large-scale agro-industrial investments and food production regimes. Debates around specism and the ethics of the non-human, as well as conflicts around the environmental dimensions of new technologies, such as nanotechnologies, also offer avenues for further research. Among recent topics also figure conflicts associated with urban political ecology, dispossession and environmental degradation now well-emerged economies, payments for ecological services, including those related to climate change mitigation, such as REDD+, and a broadly defined biopolitics in the Anthropocene, as well as the political ecologies of degrowth, and, as you mentioned, utopian realities of alternatives to capitalism. So not only does capitalism transform conditions of access and control over the environment through a productivist legitimation and of dispossession and the monetized logic of accumulation, but capitalism also transforms both environmental ontologies and epistemic perspective, changing ways of seeing, understanding, and engaging with environments, resources, and landscapes. Communication is, of course, at the core of this transformation, not only enabling phony monetization, false standardization, and biased regulations, but also disguising violent socio-natural processes of exploitation, production, and conservation that are fueling the capitalist processes. Financialization, through mostly stock market-based leveraging and multi-layered risk management, also often aggravates and deepens these processes, further enabling capital holders to profit from transforming the places and lives of others and other directing attention to the structural dimensions of what Paul Robbins called the many violent ecologies of global inequalities, political ecology studies also seeks to explore in more depth the movements of resistance to resource capitalism and the legitimacy of the state in matter of resource access and control, and the different processes and forms of exclusion in access and control of resources, including at the micro scale, what Derek Paul and his colleagues call the intimate exclusions that are taking place at the community and family levels. In this regard, ethnographic approaches within political ecology often identify divides along, for example, gender lines, such as the vulnerability of material inheritance to resource capitalism, between generations, such as the selling out and squandering of birthright entitlements to land to capitalist land transfer, and across modes of production, such as advocates of capital-intensive large-scale exploitation versus traditionalist resource holders. So political ecology approaches have made several contributions to the study of environmental and resource-related conflicts. First, by reconceptualizing scarcity and abundance and dependence both historically and spatially, by considering how uneven power relations and resource entitlements manage the antagonizing effects of conflicts on social identities, by demonstrating how violence as a process, rather than simply as an event, reshapes conditions of access and control of resources. Second, by questioning not only at which location, but also at what scales are conflicts occurring, and recognizing the chronic and multiscalar character of many environmental resource-related conflicts. Third, by accounting for a broader range of violence than geopolitical and mainstream political perspective do, and they enable thereby to understand different types of conflicts and political forms of violence. The silent violence of policy-induced famine suffering for what's the slow violence of pollutants, the gendered violence of patriarchal land tenure system have all contributed to a deeper understanding of what violence consists of, but also how it becomes constitutive of particular socio-environmental outcomes. Fourth thing is we need to have for political ecology to recognize nature and resources not only as complex socio-material objects reflecting a diverse range of practices and discourses that Eric Wegener called socio-nature, but also actors taking on an active part and, for some people, a quasi-agent role in power networks and influencing what is going on. Fifth, political ecology has helped to broaden the range of connections and actors involved. Political approaches allow for some degree of accountability beyond the immediate conflict actors and perpetrators of physical violence, beyond the trigger man that I just talked about at the very beginning for Bertha's murder. So connections between resources and various forms of violence in this regard not only include commodification processes, how things or people become resources or communities defined by their use and exchange values, but also fetishization ones, such as how the imaginative aspects of resource production and consumption affect power relations and associated forms of violence. And sixth, by giving greater attention to the discursive dimension of socio-environmental processes and relations, notably to the regime of truth, legitimating and contesting particular forms of resource access and capitalist accumulation. And finally, by accounting for distinctive ontologies of nature and resources in explaining environmental conflicts. With Juan Martinez Allier again, reminding us that ecological conflicts are fought out in many languages. Mario Glaser makes in this regard some useful suggestions to better grasp the way through which environment and resources are seen, valued, and struggled over, including first taking time to understand what the conflict is about. It may not be about the environment, while the environment itself may be understood very differently. Second, by recognizing the possibility of ontological conflict, but not assuming that because there are cultural differences, then ontologies must be fair. And third, focusing on performance rather than the group ascription. And overall, seeking to maintain a pluriverse and openness of outcomes rather than accurate accounts that risk providing just another cultural perspective. Late capitalism, and you know, and many of you have worked on this, has been remarkably adept at incorporating dissenting values and discourses. Here is a good example of ecology, a currency in a sustainable economy. This is not to say that human-environment interactions within this neoliberal framework have become apolitical, or that the solutions proposed are always cynical and ineffective, but rather then they would have been selectively depoliticized. Here, I introduce, you've seen the work of Eric Sungedo, such as, such depolitization rests on two main processes. First is a managerial approach combining expert knowledge and public consultation constrained by strict inclusion criteria and limited participation in actual decision making. And second, through the populism of environmental views, for example, on sustainability and climate change, that constitute an exclusionary form of consensus that avoids critical debates by characterizing alternative viewpoints as radicalism. Examining questions of environmental justice, Swingedow argues that the consolidation of an urban political and post-political condition runs parallel to the formation of a post-democratic arrangement that has replaced debate, disagreement, and dissensions with a series of technologies of government that fuse around consensus, agreement, accountancy metrics, and technocratic environmental management. Post-political spaces can thus be characterized by what Mario Blasser terms the house of reasonable politics, within which only minor differences amenable to compromises are allowed, with the threat of expulsion should differences become unreasonable. Outside of the house reign spaces of criminalization and forceful policing, another form of depoliticization whereby adversaries become delegitimated as radicals, foreign-funded enemies of the state, that was being popular. So with my accent perspective. Our terrorists. Conflicts in this view become both exacerbated with an escalation into warlike rhetoric and use of force, and restricted in terms of opportunities for adversarial debates. Such post-political consensual police order, as Sungedo defines it, not only depoliticizes the environment and threatens democracy, but more worryingly, by doing so, it, and I quote, must of necessity lead to an ultra-politics of violent disavowal, radical closure, and ultimately to the tyrannies of violence and the foreclosure of any real spaces of engagement. He wrote that before Trump decided to go for a candidate that way. Sorry, thought we needed to breathe a bit. So given the efficiency of capitalism at increasing material throughput, extending the frontiers of social mechanisms, and deepening unequal power relations, many political ecologists believe that conflicts are not only expected, but desirable. Contestation, and I dare say, revolution, rather than consensus and incremental reformism, may thus appear as the way forward. But not all political ecologists share these views. And I don't want to talk for him, but at least I can quote some of the things that he said. James McCarthy notes that attempts to depoliticize environmental issues are not new, occurring many times, but that contemporary political activism of the sort that sometimes I've done when working with the World Bank is not inevitably co-opted or implicit in the reproduction of the status quo, so it is very hard to answer, I have to say. And that adversarial or openly conflictual politics should not hold a monopoly over what constitutes the properly political. Some, like Thomas Sheridan, even suggest that adversarial politics, in fact, lacks radicalism and owes a progressive middle way. Examining conflicts over rural landscapes in the American West, Sheridan points to the struggle to move beyond polemics and dualities and mobilize, in the words of the local group, the Riviera Coalition, a radical center committed to foster ecological, economic, and social health on Western landscapes. So while some political ecologists have denounced expert technocracies and the delegitimation of adversarial politics as paving the way to the tyrannies of violence, others prone the search for consensual forms of politics through which radical solution can be found. So the question of the positionality and personal engagements with conflict, not only about conflict, is also rather crucial. How is the scholarly practice of political ecology supposed to relate to conflicts? In the same panel on research in violence that NC Peluso participated, she mentioned that, and she argued, that our job, and here I quote, as political ecologists are not to point fingers or to act as police or informers. Yet, as researchers, we have a responsibility to add our voices to the fray. And so essentially she's advocating for great research in that. Maybe not always impartial, but at least as detailed and thorough as can be. And in this respect, Matthew Turner observes that political ecologists are well placed to understand the full realities of not only resource-related conflicts, but of their own active and passive roles as researchers in the international debates about conservation and development. I would add also the domestic and local debates. It is important that they develop the language and the tools to present the fuller complexity of resource-related conflicts to counter the overly simplified depictions that directly reduce the social, political, and moral lives of rural people in the pursuit of policy prescriptions. So while this is already 12 years old, and many new topics have come up, what I hope is that this conference will be a great place for all of you to do just that, Matthew is suggesting, and bring also a spirit of solidarity with the communities that you've been working with very hard. So thank you very much for your patience. I know when I read in French, my French accent's sometimes tedious, but thank you so much for your patience.
Thank you so much, Philippe. Very much appreciated. Our discussant is Professor Rosalie Duffy from the SOAS at the University of London. She needs a little introduction. I think she's been very central to many of the debates. Very happy to have her here, part of the organizing committee, and to give some first comments on Philippe's keynote, and then we open it up for discussion. Rosalie.
Thanks very much, and thanks very much for inviting me to do this. So, I was actually really pleased to be asked to act as discussant on Philippe's paper, because in lots of ways it's a terrific analysis of the sort of political ecology of conflict, and I think as political ecologists we do a really good job of kind of discussing over the last 10, 15 years or so, you know, what's the politics in political ecology, what's the ecology in political ecology. We also have done a very good job of understanding the role of neoliberalism in producing conflicts and in transforming relationships with nature. But I think possibly what we don't do quite as well as a political ecologist, and actually Philippe's one of the few people who does do this and does kind of address these questions squarely, is that we're perhaps not quite so good at thinking about what conflict really means. And actually, if we go back, if I think back to the very first meeting we had about this conference, we spent around about 2 hours, possibly more, talking about whether the word conflict, violence or war should be in the title, and then what kinds of participants might the inclusion of those words attract. So we had to be really careful about it, and in the end we decided on conflict rather than one of the other two. So that was one of our very first discussions well over a year ago. And in political ecology, I think we under-theorise conflict itself. While it's a very wide field of academic study on its own, it encompasses conflict studies, peace studies, also work by environmental justice approaches as well. Nancy Peluso, who's been mentioned several times already, we know about the kinds of debates, let's call them debates, between her and Homer Dixon over environmental security, and also the critiques that political ecologists have offered of environmental security and its quantitative approach. But there are huge debates in academia and whole fields of study, whole departments and whole centres dedicated to discussion of what conflict means. So there are also huge quantitative databases such as the PRIO Grid database devoted to the collection of data on how they define armed conflict. And there are significant disagreements over what armed conflict means, how to define it, whether theorists like Galtung and Wallenstein are right about the need to think about inequality and poverty as expressions of structural violence and drivers of conflict as well. We refer to conflict in political ecology, but I think many of us, and I include myself in this, don't really discuss what it is. It seems to be everything. We don't think about how to define armed conflict, even though academics spend their careers trying to work this out. We need to think about the kinds of slippage we have, the wording that we use. There's often a slippage between conflict violence, warfare, and armed struggle. But none of these things, they're not the same thing, and we need to be careful about how we use it. And language really matters. If we think about the sort of terminology that's used around different kinds of struggles and different kinds of conflicts, we can think of the labels that are attached to different groups, so terrorists, rebels, militias, insurgents, revolutionaries, or non-state armed groups as the most kind of neutral form of language about them. So again, this is hotly debated in conflict studies, and there are controversies over what conflict transformation might mean or how peace building might be approached. Are attempts at peace building in post-conflict situations, are they neoliberal? What kind of conflict transformation should we seek to achieve? And what kind of peace should be built in what ways? And there are lessons, I think, that political ecologists can learn from conflict studies, and there are also lessons that conflict studies could learn from political ecologists, but there doesn't seem to be very much engagement between the two groups. And again, I would agree very much with Philippe's comment of how do we as political ecologists do any of this without falling into counterproductive interventions. Attempts at peace building, for instance, are often very fractured and sometimes utterly fail. I also agree with Philippe's comment that we need to raise questions about the relationships with the non-human world. I'll still stick to the human-non-human divide. I know that's deeply problematic, but I'll stick with it for now. So debates about other species tend to be, for example, in my own area of work, about human-wildlife conflict. But what about the effects of human conflicts on other species as well? This can lead us into very dangerous waters. And just recently I've been asked to review what seem to be several papers trying to make the case that warfare is actually really good for biodiversity conservation because it displaces people. So it's underlain by this very Malthusian narrative of people are the threat. So war's really good because it moves people out of an area. And one of those arguments is made about the rediscovery of the great ungulate migration between Sudan and Ethiopia, that it's been protected by warfare in the region, which seems to me to be quite a dangerous line of argument to be making. A second one that's linked to that is about how refugees or internally displaced people might strip resources as they move into new areas while they get displaced by other kinds of conflict. Again, I'm thinking of a report that was done several years ago by Traffic about the way that refugees were identified as a problem for biodiversity in the surrounding area because they were engaging in illegal hunting in the local reserves. But what the problem was that the protein rations that were given out by humanitarian relief organisations weren't big enough, and so people naturally turned to the resources around them. So the problem then isn't the refugees or the internally displaced people, the problem is the management and the way that organisations work with those people, the kinds of rations that they were being given. But again, you could make a very easy argument that refugees might be bad for the environment, or internally displaced people might be bad for biodiversity conservation. So I think we do have to address these questions and these shifts much more effectively than we do at present. Personally as well, I intend to examine the implications of extending the principles of humanitarian intervention and responsibility to protect or duty to prevent to other species in specific contexts and what that might actually mean. So again, this raises debates about the Anthropocene, which again Philippe mentioned towards the end of his keynote, in which it's useful to remember that authors like Baskin and Castry have pointed out that humanity in those debates is thought of as a singular whole with common and equal responsibility for the creation of environmental change. And political ecologists, I think, can really help with breaking down those sorts of debates and creating more nuance. So political ecology can help us as scholars, activists, or however we like to label ourselves. It can help us address those really big challenges. And one of the key claims for many political ecologists is that it allows not just the critique, but helps us build ideas and practices around genuine alternatives. But what are they? Might they be degrowth, post-humanism, or are we still stuck in critiquing the kind of there is no alternative, the Tina narrative, and certainly within the UK, I was one of the 48% who voted to remain. Let's just get that out there and out of the way, so I don't have to spend the rest of the conference apologising for the actions of my country in the last. Oh, that's not my country. I'm now going back to pretending I'm Irish, which I am, by the way. So I'm European. But you know, again, Brexit might produce all sorts of political ecology things. You know, I'm trying to grasp at tiny silver linings, clutching at straws that maybe the nuclear power plant that's planned for Cornwall won't go ahead now. So there may be political ecology struggles around Brexit that we can all engage with as well. These are the important debates that we'll have at this conference. It's an important and key moment, I think, in developing our approach as an intellectual community, and I think Philippe has set up all those questions in a really excellent manner, so thanks very much. Speak like this or use a mic?
Maybe the mic is on its way, so.
Thank you very much. Philippe's keynote ended up coming into one of the first questions that sparked in my mind. You said some of the many political ecologists who remind us that what gets counted as politics or what registers as conflict for an international audience, a certain privileged kind, eclipses diverse forms of negotiating and contesting, especially those everyday life kinds. And at the beginning of the talk established a narrative of escalating conflict. And one of the slides that mapped this had, I was dying for a metric of global and public and protest, which I think were the terms. And so I'd love to hear more from both or either of you about how we measure and define not just protest, but global and public in ways that can tend to the axes of negotiation in the everyday lives of those for whom our privilege might make us more likely to overlook their terms, as well as what possibilities we're fighting for.
Thank you, very quickly. Maybe one of the up here. I think this is quite low.
Yeah, I think probably some political scientists have thought about that. They probably would call it something like interactions in between unevenly powerful groups, and so you could measure the number of times they are protesting, or they are going to a negotiation table, or they just relate in their everyday ways. But yeah, it's probably difficult to articulate. I want to come back on this maybe idea of conflicts that matter politically. I did a little bit of work this year on mining conflicts, including in Peru, and what really struck me is the narrative that given the patterns of previous conflicts, the number of conflicts out there, the prominence of extractive conflicts within social conflicts in general in Peru, if you want to be noticed, you need to have a dead person, as crudely as that. And several people mentioned it, we saw it. And it was almost like if we were in the realm of martyrdom in terms of the political language that was sometimes used. And that for me was kind of traumatic. And at the same time, Peru is supposed to be a place where you've got a lot of negotiation going on. You've got a relatively sophisticated apparatus of engagement, but it's being seen as failing, in part because of the narrowness of the so-called, house of the reasonable, meaning that a lot of people are excluded from the negotiation tables. Very often they are people who lost elections and are seen as political outsiders who could be making trouble. And for those people, they are interested to set a parallel kind of track to a series of demonstrations, etc., in order to get a follower and get some followers. So think I'll leave it here and maybe take another question.
I found, thank you Philippe, I found the comment about you having produced this phenomenon of a banking insurance quite interesting. And I think that us as researchers often going into places that aren't where we are from with these ideas that there might be, for instance, a war going on, or we think that there might be a conflict going on, or we bring these definitions in with us. I wonder how it is we produce these situations. So between us as experts and the sort of definitions that we have of the world, going into a place and maybe producing something, some new phenomenon. I wonder if you could expand on that a little bit, or at least provide some details to this banking insurance.
Yeah, great. Well, the particular insurance is just that, essentially the beers, as well as the diamond industry in general, needed a way to say, we fix the problem of conflict diamonds. And the way to fix it was to have a certification scheme that NGOs participated and pushed for. Okay. So in that way, we helped them getting something that was also legitimated by all the NGOs that were saying, yeah, this is kind of working, this is a credible scheme, etc., so we can move on. Of course, there was a second phase to it, which was to say, well, it's fine that we, say rebel groups are not, producing diamonds that get laundered through those companies. But it didn't say whether or not the conditions of work, the creation of the mines were done in a fair way without human rights abuses, and a lot of people complain about that. More generally, I think, to come back to your general point, I'm losing my thoughts here, but essentially, rephrase a little bit of your question, sorry.
We go into the field.
Yes, okay, got it. Okay, so my point here would be essentially that if you go there and you feel like your only allies or interlocutors or the people you can do something with are going to be the international community, the international organizations, then it's probably going to be backfiring and it's not going to be that great. The problem that often you face in context where the politics means that it's very dangerous for people to stake their neck, for local organizations, is that you're going to be kind of naturally turning to the big donors, the big guys, the UN, the governments, whatever, and you're going to try to orchestrate. And when I was naively engaging into that, I think that's how I saw it. It's UN fixed stuff, but no. So I think it's very important to make sure that if you do engage, then you do so with, local, sorry to use the term civil society organization. I know that the term also covers many entrepreneurs that articulate that relationship between international donors and have continued the politics of extraversion, but essentially to have grassroots, groups with whom you can work, and they will better understand, the side effects of many of the interventions. That would be a little bit of a prerequisite, and that's why maybe it's not so clear in the talk because maybe I took it off, but really making sure that you engage with an environmental justice ethos and with local groups, and in particular local activists is very important. At the same time, we're having a debate now on one case, are you going to be reinforcing minority dissent voices that can be quite disruptive within the communities? So it's also important to know who you're going to be backing and provide, your credibility or privilege, whatever it is, put that into the equation. Thank you.
I was quite struck by Rosaline's comment on the kind of limited and selective dialogue between the fields of political ecology and conflict studies. Coming from a pure, primarily conflict studies background, this is pretty much what I observe in the political ecology field, where certain debates on disaggregating dynamics of conflict and dynamics of violence do not really seem mainstream in political ecology. So I was just wondering, aside maybe from the ways in which certain subfields institutionalize academically, what do you think are the causes of this limited dialogue, and how can this be overcome, or how can more connection between these subfields be created?
Yeah, I mean, I think that my own explanation for that would be, because I come from a politics and international relations background, is that conflict studies, critical security studies, and peace studies, they've kind of generated out of that singular academic discipline, and so they've remained siloed. And political ecology is a little bit more kind of open. So, for instance, I was very struck by the fact that you said you kind of accidentally came into political ecology, because I only started to use the label political ecology after so many people told me I was one. I didn't actually realise for several years. I just thought I was somebody who did a really funny branch of international relations that no one else recognised. So I think that there could be more engagement from the sort of politics and international relations side, sort of conflict studies, because again, within that, I think there isn't, beyond the kind of environmental security type analysis and the Malthusian framework. So if I think of someone like Paul Rogers, who's a really big thinker in sort of conflict studies, in his book Losing Control, you know, I think he does play into some Malthusian narratives there, and actually political ecologists could help deconstruct that and produce a kind of a better analysis. So I think, you know, it's difficult to know exactly how to engage with them. I'll use a very personal example. I'm married to a conflict studies person, and we ignored each other's work for 15 years. Until about 6 months ago, and now we start talking to each other about it. So if it's in the same house and I can't do it, then I don't really have a blueprint for everybody else. But I think it really would be good to kind of to do more together, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, in this respect, so I mentioned a little bit like age of the environmental justice atlas, and not to say that GIS is, but it's true that political scientists sometimes bring a sort of rigor analysis approach that sometimes seems to be a little bit missing from political ecology. And I know that Leah Temper, who put up the EG Atlas, that's what she hopes in some ways. And maybe she's totally belonging to this kind of crowd, but at the same time she's writing, yeah, why not? Why having this bias? If it can happen, why not?
Maybe time for one more question. Paul, question, but comment.
It seems to me that we talk about political ecology, we lump everything together. You know, you've got the radical ones like Bram, believes in political economy and structure and all sorts of things. I'm from the opposite end, right? I don't believe so much in structure. I'm very much sort of attracted to people that struggle for resources, the enrichment of resources which is not recognized, and which moves me away from structural explanation. So I think we need to be a little bit careful saying political ecologists, because they're different strands, right? Karl Siemer would also be called a political ecologist, but he's far away from, let's say, political economy. So I'm not so sure how you position yourself in that. And we have these different positions in our universities, which makes it interesting.
And I think it's great that it's a global house, and with people from different backgrounds and very different types of approaches also, and sometimes like.
But I would never call myself a political ecologist. But you're still welcome, Paul. Any last comment or question? Yes, here.
I'll try to be quick. I want to kind of close with this, coming back to the question of how do we understand conflict, and looking at the title of the conference, Political Ecologies of Conflict, Capitalism and Contestation. It seems like conflict we understand it as something different than contestation. But do we understand conflict as something visible, or something that erupts, or as something that's an ontological basis, as an inherent character of the social and the ecological? And kind of related to that, how do we observe conflict? So I think it might be more useful to say that all socio-environmental processes are conflictual, and some get contested or some get acted upon, rather than saying conflicts have escalated in recent times. And wanted to put up.
So yeah, just to build a little bit on that, I think there are like kind of three ways of seeing conflicts. Some people see it really as an event, and they kind of equate it with violence, and often it's in the idea of violent conflict. Sometimes they see conflict really as a process, with violence as the outcome, and sometimes the outcome of contestation, as you're saying. And others, and maybe some people who do political ecology approaches would see maybe violent processes actually with a very broadly defined conceptualization of violence as resulting in conflicts and then contestation, for example. You see what I'm trying to get at? It's in fact that the violence precedes the conflict. And it's precisely because of the experiences of the daily violences, for example, and feelings of oppressions and frustrations, etc., that you go into conflict, which is kind of the basic definition. So I think it's a very iterative process. I think we should not be fixated on the word conflict. As we discussed at the summer school also, we should be careful at saying what are we missing when we just focus on conflict and we want to see the conflicts, identify the conflict. So, can move on maybe a little bit from it, but at the same time use it when it's useful. And I think in my case, it's been useful a number of times, but you can easily get, flooded into one kind of interpretation. And very often it has been conflict as a manifestation of violence and of a very physical, direct one. And that's, I think, very ridiculous.
Thank you. Maybe hand over applause for the speakers. With that sort of roundups this particular session. We go for a coffee break now. There should be coffee, tea, and everything.